I will officially call this meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Um, Good to at least see folks virtually. I'll start off with our conflict of interest statement, which I'll read in the interest of preserving public confidence in the actions of this board. The chair reminds members of their duty to avoid any conflicts of interest and inquiries as to whether any member knows of any conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest with respect to matters to come before the board. With that said, I'll move to the agenda that you see on your screen and ask that we approve this agenda for today's meeting.
So move.
Thank you, Stagg.
Second.
Great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Well, then we'll move on to the approval of minutes that Marika sent out earlier in the week from the February 18th meeting. If there are no changes or discussions on those minutes, I would like a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, Patrick. And second?
Second.
Thank you, Cameron. Great. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Moving on, do we have any members of the public that have joined us today?
No, I don't believe so. Not in the office. I don't think online. Samantha?
No, not online.
Great. All right. Moving right along. This is easy. Nobody told me it was this easy. This is great. Moving into easements 101 and SEHC's Jess Lagus.
Yeah, thank you, Lane. Good morning, everybody. Do I have the ability to share my screen?
You should.
Hold on
Yeah,
a second. I'll make sure that she does.
Perfect.
Okay, I think I got it. Are you all seeing a bit of a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. Let's get into presentation mode. All right, so I'm going to breeze over some of this. I know we have mixed knowledge in the room, so please feel free to hop in anytime with questions. And I might just kind of based on interest, dig in deeper on some parts and breeze over some other things. So most of you know me. My name's Jess Lagus. I do the farmland protection work at Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy. So my role is a little bit analogous to what Ariel and Martha do for the county. But the county is the county, and we are a nonprofit land trust. So there's a little bit of differences in the way we operate. As a nonprofit, we are mission driven. And all of the work that we do is with voluntary landowners. Most land trusts are geographically bound. There are some national level land trusts. We are a local land trust, and this is our service area. We work in 7 counties in Western North Carolina and 3 counties in Eastern Tennessee. We originated along the Appalachian Trail, and then we've our breadth of work has moved along since then, but everywhere that our borders end, another land trust picks up. So Conserving Carolina that you all interact with. Riverlink is a little tighter into Asheville area. On the east side, we've got Foothills Conservancy, and on the west side, Mainspring Conservancy. This is SHC's mission statement. I won't read it to you. It's available on our website and probably in all of our Buncombe County grant applications. But from this mission, we derive our conservation goals. So some of our goals are protecting habitat for wildlife and rare plants. This is a little bit of detail on that. I won't read them to you, but we'll move through quickly because there's a lot to cover. We protect scenic views, and these are from very specific places. And this also comes out of the IRS's definition of what a qualified conservation contribution is. So from prominent areas, from trails that are well known, from rivers, and from roads. We work on water quality, and this is really different across the nation with land trusts and conservation operations. But in our area, land conservation is water conservation. There's so much water in our region. Protecting groundwater is just almost inherent in the land protection that we do. And then this is my role at SAHC. We work on working farms that supply local food. A lot of this comes into bottomlands, floodplains, highly developable areas, and important soils, which you all hear me report on a lot. And then we also focus on places for people to recreate. So we have these conservation goals that are derived from our mission. And then in our strategic planning every 5 years or so, we're revisiting that this year in September. We update our strategies to achieve those goals. Our current strategic plan includes conservation planning to protect the highest priority tracts. So we've talked a little bit about that in here, and I can dive in deeper if we want to in this presentation. But SHC uses partner knowledge, local knowledge, and GIS data to create models for what are the most important tracts to work on in our region. That's not to say that we don't work on tracts that aren't high priorities, but it helps us look at what we should be focusing on. Stag, I saw your hand raised.
Yes. How do we get land onto that list of high priority? What's critical, I think, certainly in our area, but also to Pisgah View State Park and the county, is the north face of Mount Pisgah, 380 acres, going to within a few hundred feet of the top, is in private hands. And to me, that strikes, it should check all the boxes for high priority, but how do we get something on that list?
That is a question you could talk to Hani about, Stag.
Okay.
This list is derived from actual GIS modeling. It has to do with the size of a tract. So if it's highly parcelized, it's probably not going to pop up in our model. That's, again, like I said, though, that's not to say that those aren't things that are high priorities. It's just that we're limiting what is demonstrated as a priority in the model so that we can focus our work. Like I said, if there are conservation partners that have a priority, that becomes a priority for us. Obviously, work around the park system is important. So if you've got specific tracks in mind, though, I would point you to discuss with Hani, Stag.
Yeah, Honey, we've actually met on that. I just wasn't aware that you actually had a priority list. So I'll circle back with Hani on that.
Yeah. Thanks. Again, government agencies, so that kind of leads into the next one. So the U.S. Forest Service, for example, has a proclamation boundary of an area that they would like to acquire that, and they like tracts that simplify their boundary. In-holdings are important, both in Forest Service land, in any public agency land, really. And in our area, we have a lot of different public agencies that hold land, which is great for conservation and great for us to have partners we can transfer land to. And then part of our modeling includes landscape resilience to climate change, and then important soils and working farms are sort of a separate model that we use that also incorporate our other priorities.
Hey, Jess, quick question on the landscape resilience one as a strategy. Are you guys just as a matter of protecting land, you're helping with resiliency, or are you doing something else in addition?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are specific data points that that we utilize for that. So one is TNC's forest blocks. And that is a data that identifies large intact hubs of forest land and then expounding on those. And then also the Nature Conservancy's terrestrial resilience data, we've done a lot of work. We had a grant with Open Space Institute to modify that data to also identify underrepresented settings within the protected landscape. So we have a variety of data points that we use to meet those goals. I think those are the two top ones that are part of our modeling. And then again, I guess high elevation lands generally, and working in our cloud islands. These are great questions. Thanks, you guys, for being so engaged. Okay, so SHC was founded in 1974. We recently celebrated our 50th year, and we have protected 104,800 acres. That number is constantly growing, and in fact, our deed review project with the county is closing tomorrow. SHC won't be in the chain of title, but we have been very active in that project and are excited to have that closing coming up. And we're accredited. So this is important for land trust. Like any sort of industry, there is a body that provides best practices. It's called the Land Trust Alliance. They also provide a lot of learning opportunities and advocacy on the behalf of land trusts. We were one of the first accredited land trusts in the country, and we've gotten renewal in 2015 and 2021. And as you can see that pattern, 2026 is a renewal year for us. So we're very busy with accreditation right now. That means, though, that we are beholden to, beyond the IRS regulations, our Land Trust Alliance's best management practices. So this holds land trust to a high standard of transparency and credibility, and affects the way all of our policies and procedures. Okay, so getting into the easements part, conservation easements are only one part of the way that land trusts protect land. They are a large part of our portfolio, as you can see. But we also acquire land outright. Some of those we hold as preserves, some transfer to our agency partners. And we also acquire land through reserve life estate is an interesting one, where maybe we own the land, but a landowner retains the right to stay on that land. They continue to pay the taxes on that land and use and manage the land until their death, but our name is already on the deed. And then donation by will is a little bit different, because that the landowner actually puts it in their will, and then we acquire it after their passing. And that occasionally happens without our knowledge, which is always exciting.
Yes,
Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
What falls into the assist bucket there?
Assist. So for example, deed review, we are not actually going to own or be in the chain of title of that land. So we're not acquiring it and then transferring it. We've been part of the fundraising and doing the due diligence and the transaction, but it will go directly to the county. So that's considered an assist in that we aren't in the chain of title. Sometimes we have more less active participation in an assist, where we're only fundraising, and then another entity is doing all of the actual transactional work. So an easement, in a nutshell, is a voluntary legal agreement. It goes on record at the county Register of Deeds, so it is a deed ultimately. And it must be between a qualified conservation organization. In our case, that's SHC. It can also be the County Soil and Water Conservation District. And it permanently restricts subdivision and development rights. There are easements that are term easements, but as a nonprofit, we cannot participate in those. Every easement that SHC does will be a perpetual easement. There are a lot of benefits to easements. I can't see all of my text because of this bar. Let me see if I can move it. There we go. There are ecological and cultural benefits, as well as financial benefits for the landowner. I'm not going to read through each of these, but some of the main points are that when you do an easement, whoever the landowner is still the landowner. They still pay the taxes on the land. They still manage the land, and they can still sell that land subject to the easement, and it can be inherited by their heirs. And that's a benefit because SHC doesn't have to take on all of that management and capacity. And it's less costly than purchasing land outright. So it's great for a land trust to participate in, and it can be really helpful for landowners, for the right landowner who's willing to accept the restrictions that come with that. All right, so farmland protection. The side of the work that I will bring to you all is a growing part of our portfolio, as you can see. And part of that is because there is data demonstrating that North Carolina is the second in the nation leading farmland loss. And so there's a lot of investment in farmland protection. It's easier for us to raise money to pay landowners for agricultural conservation easements than it is to pay landowners for habitat or wildland conservation easements. Stag, I saw your hand up again.
May want to come back to the question later, but it has to do on your prior chart on the financial side. Why don't we come back to that at the end? I have some questions about how easements affect tax valuations and selling price and stuff like that. So
sure. Oh, I had some text here. These are some more of those benefits that are particularly associated with farmland conservation. All right, so the concept of conservation easements comes from the English law of real estate law, and it's called the bundle of sticks analogy. So when you own land, the rights associated with that ownership are like a bundle of sticks. Some of those sticks include things like residential use, your rights to the water on the land and timber, your rights to hunt and fish the land. You've got the right to produce agricultural products on your land. You've got the right to privacy and many other rights. You also have some rights easements may extinguish. Things like subdivision. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing everything on my screen at once. The development of your land and commercial and industrial uses. So easements typically maintain these rights, although agriculture and timber harvest might depend on the specific easement. If there's an easement designed around conservation values like rare habitat, especially timber might not be allowed. But most easements will at least restrict, if not completely diminish your ability to have these rights on land. All right, Stag, this is getting a little bit into your question. This is more about a hypothetical coming up with the value of a conservation easement. We start with the full fair market value of land, and an appraisal for a conservation easement actually has two values in it. A before value, which is this land before there's an easement value if you were just to market it on the open market. We talk about this as the fee simple market value. And then an appraisal will come up with an after value. So the land after all of the rights that are restricted within the conservation easement are accounted for in an appraisal. It's often similar to, but not a direct equation to the residual value when you put land in present use value tax deferment. And that's because present use value tax deferment is saying we're going to tax this land not at the best and highest use, which is typically development, but at the current use, which might be agriculture, horticulture, or even wildlife habitat. So the value of the easement is the difference in those two values. We can often pay landowners a percentage of that value. And what percentage of that value will depend on a lot of different factors, mostly having to do with what our funding partners are looking for in a tract. When we access federal dollars through the NRCS program for agricultural conservation easements, we can often pay landowners up to 75% of easement value. If we can only access our state funding through NCDA, then we can pay landowners 50% of easement value. If we can only raise private dollars to pay a landowner for an easement, it's more like 25% of the easement value. The easement value, the difference in these two factors has to do a lot with the developability of the land. What is the access? How does it lie? Will it perk well? Is it in floodplain? Is it on steep slopes? Are there views? Things that would make it suitable for development will make the easement value higher because what you are restricting, that development value, is greater. So farmland tends to be have a higher easement value than steep mountain habitat land. Okay,
Jess?
moving away from finances. So if anyone has any questions there, let's touch on it now before we go into the steps of completing an easement. Yes, Stag.
Yeah, we have obviously just gotten most of us, or maybe all of us who live in Buncombe County have gotten the county reassessments. So for example, I know there's 200 acres that are in a conservation easement in perpetuity. And so do they both come up? So in this case, what they call, I guess, the total market value is 1.2 million. And the appraised value is 82,000. Now this is one that was done, almost 20 years ago. Are both of those reappraised? Would be my first question when a reappraisal is done.
I do not know the county's system for doing property valuations. I don't know if maybe Ariel, you have any insights on that?
Yeah, so I can say I don't know the specifics on the reappraisal methods, but I do know that the tax office is doing community events all over the next month or so, all around each community, answering tax questions specifically on the reevaluation process.
Yeah.
The tax assessor came to the commissioners last night mentioning all of this because there's lots of concerns and questions and specific on property that's in present use value or protected in a conservation easement. There's some specifics around how those exemptions are calculated. So I don't know the specifics on that piece, but yeah. And I do know that most of the rules around the rates of present use value of that deferment is set by the state. So it's not county specific. It's set at the state level. So, but more specific questions, definitely look up those tax community meetings, and that would be the perfect place to get those questions answered.
Okay. Yeah, the question that directly relates to what we're doing here is when I see a property like that, would the reasonable price to acquire that property, say, and add it to the state park or something like that, be what's now called the appraised market value? In other words, the 82,000, because the owner's already put it in conservation, and therefore it's a reflection of the remaining value. So
that is a very different discussion because the ultimate value of any real estate is what someone's willing to pay for it. Typically, the way that easements perform on the market is that they're selling, it's limiting who can buy it, right? Developers aren't going to be interested anymore. However, the person who wanted an estate still wants an estate, and now that still exists there. So we see older easements. If there's been a brand new appraisal with showing that diminution in value, then there's a difference in how those tracts perform on the market. But typically, and this is across the nation, when eased land sells, if it's been 20 years since that easement went into place, it often performs like an unencumbered tract. you're limiting your buyer pool who would be interested, but those that would have been interested in an estate are still interested in that estate with those encumbrances. So I don't know how the state would view that, though, Stag, and I'm not sure. U.S. Forest Service will not accept land that has any encumbrance whatsoever. So they would never accept land with an easement on it. I don't know how the state views that for a park, for example.
Oh, that's important to know. So you're saying, because this particular parcel, which would connect the national forest with the state park, and therefore make the state eligible for national firefight funding, but the Forest Service would not be willing to accept it because it's already restricted.
Right.
The state may or may not, given the state's not, they're not into well, state park in particular has no commercial use other than visitation. Okay, that's helpful. I mean, these are the type of nitty gritties I need to understand as we work on our plan for what to go after around Pisgah View State Park. Thank you, Jess.
Absolutely. Am I doing okay on time, Ariel? Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm going to breeze over a little bit of this, but I'm going to dig more into the due diligence because I think we talk about those costs a lot in our meetings in LCAB, and I think it'd be helpful to dig into what that is. But a conservation easement takes a long time to complete, and when we have agency funding, it takes a longer time to complete. And a lot of that happens well before we actually seek funding. So when we get an inquiry, we will, as a team, analyze that property. We'll make maps. We'll look at all of the conservation values that we have data on. We'll look at adjacency to other properties, and what the landowner has described as their hopes for the property. Then, if we determine it's something we could raise funds for and participate in, we have to go through a rigorous set of approvals on our end. So when we come to the LCAB for funding requests, we've already gone through all of this. And that involves first a land protection committee comprised of experts who review the project with us and either approve it and recommend it for board approval, or say we need information or this doesn't meet merit. We don't typically get doesn't meet merit because we are very conscientious in the projects that we choose to work on. Once the Land Protection Committee has recommended that the board approve a project, then it goes to our board for their approval. And they, again, may say we need more information or give it the go-ahead. And then once we have all those board approvals, we usually enter into, if we're paying funds to a landowner for an easement, we will enter into an option agreement with the landowner and then go to all of our funding sources to raise dollars for that. Sometimes that's a simple, just one request to the LCAB, if it's fully donated, a request to the LCAB for transaction costs if it's within Buncombe County. If it's a very expensive, high priority, low bottomland farm, and we're going to NRCS for funding, that becomes a much more complicated project that takes a lot longer because those funding cycles are only ever so often. So depending on the time of year that a landowner contacts us, if they contacted us right now, it would be probably next January before we could submit a proposal on their behalf to NRCS. And then those funding agencies typically take about a year to review applications. So we're already building in a year to a year and a half just before we even have funding to work with. Once we have funds, that's when we'll start doing the due diligence, which we'll dive into a little bit more deeply soon. And at the end of that, we actually draft the deed of conservation easement. And all along the way, there's negotiating and problem solving, and then finally a closing. Okay, well, we're going to get into, I'm going to talk a little bit about the funding landscape that's available. This is specifically for the agricultural conservation easements. It doesn't apply to land that is not working land, but this is where I specialize. So if land is fully donated, there are federal income tax benefits that are available to landowners. Also, if a portion of the land is donated, there are tax benefits at the federal level. North Carolina has just passed last year a new state income tax credit for conservation. It's a little bit hard to decipher because it's capped at 5 million across the state, and then it will be prorated depending on how many projects happen that year for any given project. So it's really hard to help landowners understand what level of benefit that might give them. But luckily, that's not our role. We are not allowed to give tax advice. We point them to their tax advisors, but we do let them know it's a possible available benefit. So we also reach out to private donors. We're very lucky as a nonprofit land trust in the area with very enthusiastic donors that we can raise some private dollars to benefit conservation. And then there are quite a few different public grants that are available, as well as private foundation grants. So the Land and Water Conservation Fund won't work on working lands, but this is one that Michelle and Hani often work on in our shop. So this is non-working lands. And then I've mentioned NRCS, that's the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is a program of the USDA. They have the jargon gets a little heady, but they have an agricultural conservation easement program through which they do agricultural land easements. So ASAP ALE. I think you may hear me refer to this program as either NRCS, federal, or ASAP ALE. And then we have the State Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Development and Farmland Preservation Trust Fund, which is ADFP for short. We refer to that as NCDA or ADFP funding. That's our state funding agency partner. And each of these has their own interests, right? And their own metrics for qualifying land and what's going to rank well in their competitive grant cycles. And then again, not so much on the ag side, but every now and then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act. The North Carolina Land and Water Fund. Sorry, this is a federal program, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, neither of which apply to agricultural lands. And then in Buncombe County alone, do we have access to county funding? We work in a lot of other counties. None of the other counties participate in funding, so we're really lucky in Buncombe County to have access to the LCAB funding pool. I think I have slides maybe after this, but just wrapping up that once we protect land, whether it's land that we acquire in fee or actual conservation easements, that comes with a perpetual stewardship burden. In creating the easement itself, our stewardship team's responsible for creating a baseline documentation report. It's kind of a snapshot in time of what the easement looked like at closing. And then when our team goes out to monitor, which happens annually, they look at that baseline, that snapshot in time, and then they look at the conservation easement and then see whatever changes have happened on the land and determine whether or not those changes were allowable in the easement. And that's how they identify any potential violation of the easement. So that's the annual monitoring piece. Sorry, did I hear someone?
Sorry. Yeah, Ariel, sorry. I have a quick question before, I tried to get you before we went stewardship, but it's about like valuing. Can you explain a little bit about how you guys make your like estimates on how much you're going to pay a landowner, like maybe in the application phase, or how you do that kind of like negotiation back and forth with landowners, or maybe there's not negotiation, but like kind of what methods are you using before you get that appraisal value?
So we are constantly working across this landscape, and we almost always have comps nearby. So we rely on appraisals of nearby projects that are similar to come up with the values that we present to landowners. That budget is also based on what funding we think we're likely to be able to raise. So I've heard some conservation organizations will kind of lay out this menu of this is this is the funding landscape and this is what is available. But and then maybe they'll apply for things that the project was never going to rank well for. We won't even talk with landowners about the federal funding source if we know there are on-off binary qualifiers for that program, right? So if we know that a tract will not qualify for that program, we're never even going to mention it to landowners because it's kind of like waving this shiny trophy at them and being like, you're never going to get it.
Yeah.
It's just not, it's not super helpful for either the relationship or, there's so much information to present a landowner throughout this process. It's so much education. It's so much just info dumping that adding layers that aren't applicable, I think is not winning anybody any favors. So our method is to analyze carefully how a project will rank within these different funding sources, and then go to a landowner built on a budget based on that potential. We still won't say to a landowner, we can guarantee you're going to get this, but we have had 100% award rate so far in all of our applications for the last 10 years.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I got lost. Here we are. So thanks for the question, Ariel. So annual monitoring, this is a lot of our stewardship team's time going out to all of the properties that we own or hold easements on annually to monitor. And then if our team does find a violation of an easement, we are legally beholden to rectifying that violation. It's not optional for us. So often what we see are encroachments. A neighbor built a carport that comes over the line, or a neighbor built a driveway that comes over the line. A lot of times it's third party. Every now and then it will be the actual landowner who participated in the easement who went outside of a building envelope to build something. But we have a lot of things in place to try and prevent the actual easement landowner that we have a relationship with from coming up against a violation. We did experience a timber theft, a 40-acre timber theft on property that SHC owned. We have insurance that helps us pay for litigation when something like that happens, that's specific to land trusts. And they helped support our litigation efforts, and we won that case. However, the forester, the logger that committed that theft just left the state and never paid up, but it set an important precedent. And sometimes people will build, illegal stream fords. That's something we don't see as often on agricultural easements because usually there is already a system of roads in place when the easement comes into being. Ensuring risk through terra firma, that's the insurance that I mentioned. And our executive director actually sits on the terra firma claims review board. So he's getting a really solid view of all of the claims across the nation that are coming to terra firma and what types of things are challenging easements across the nation. And we're constantly updating our easement template to reflect, to tighten up in areas where easements have been challenged nationally. And then our stewardship staff is also burdened with land management on properties that we own outright. So you can imagine we try not to own a lot of property outright. Okay, so I guess here's a turning point where I can take the temperature of the room. I can give you an example of how easements can affect land transfer in a positive way, or we can dive deeper into due diligence. Or maybe we have time for both. I don't know. Does anyone have a preference on which direction we head here?
Due diligence.
Okay, great.
I'll vote.
There. Okay, due diligence. Our accrediting body has specific things that we have to do for any transaction. And then there are things that it's best practice to do, though maybe not required. So for example, a survey is not necessarily required I think it might be required by NCDA, by our state funding partner, but it's not technically required by NRCS, our federal funding partner. It's not technically required by the Land Trust Alliance. However, it makes really good sense if you're trying to build a case for exactly what you are protecting to know exactly what you have and are protecting. So SHC, I'm not sure if we've ever done a transaction without a survey. Even if a landowner has a recent survey on file, if there's a conservation easement, the boundaries of the easement might not perfectly match the boundaries of the tract. If there's, for example, an existing encroachment and the landowner doesn't want to ask their neighbor to move something, we can just pull back the boundary of the easement off the tract boundary. Or we typically in an agricultural easement will have interior boundaries where agricultural infrastructure and possibly a residence would be allowed, but those are defined surveyed lines where that envelope exists. And so that also needs to be added in a survey. And of course, if there's not a direct frontage on a public road, we want to survey the right of way. We also, after a survey, we will do a title investigation based on the survey. Depending on what funding might be involved, that might be a 35-year look back or a 65-year look back if NCDA is involved. And then a phase 1 environmental site assessment. Some of y'all have a lot of experience with this. This is an environmental engineering firm that would, a third party that we contract with, that they review aerial imagery and over time and conduct interviews and actually walk on the land, searching for any potential environmental contamination. That is a requirement of Land Trust Alliance to have a clean phase 1, or if a phase 1 reveals any problems, having a phase 2 environmental site assessment that goes a little deeper into soil testing. An appraisal. So we won't do an appraisal if there's a fully donated easement, but if there's any money involved in the transaction, then we have to do an appraisal, and that is a requirement of the IRS and our Land Trust Alliance accreditation standards. If it's an agricultural tract that is currently in production or is being funded by any of our agency partners, we have to have an agricultural conservation plan. Soil and Water does a great job developing these, and so does NRCS. And Ariel, I've never really understood where those lines are drawn and who does what, but it seems like there's a lot of overlap in when we ask for one of those. That's a free service of NRCS and Soil and Water Conservation District for landowners. It doesn't cost the landowners anything to do. So that's not one that you see come up in our list of due diligence asks to LCAB because it's free. A forest management plan is required by some of our funding partners, whether or not there's active forestry. SHC will require it if there's any plan for active forestry or timber harvest, or we'll let landowners know that if those plans come up in the future, they would have to create a forest management plan and a timber harvest plan before they could do any kind of harvest. Those do cost some money. They're fairly cheap. They're $5 an acre through the North Carolina Forest Service. And then we're lucky enough to have a firm in the area that has grant funds to make their costs match Forest Service costs for landowners working on conservation easements. Drafting the conservation easement, depending on the funding source, that might be something we have an attorney do or that we do in-house if there's a template that we have to use from an agency. The baseline documentation report I mentioned, Buncombe County doesn't fund our staff time, so they won't fund the easement drafting if we do it or the baseline documentation report unless we hire that out. So occasionally you'll see requests for the baseline from us, but sometimes that's something that we do in-house. We're kind of moving right now to a hybrid model, especially in Buncombe County when there are potential funds to help with it that limits the burden on our stewardship. They'll still do all the anthropogenic features on the land. So any infrastructure that humans have built, they will document all of that because that's where they're going to be hyper-focused in the future on monitoring. So it helps the land stewardship lead to have been very familiar with it at the beginning. But we might outsource the inventory, biological inventory. Stewardship contribution. So this is something we ask any landowner that we're interacting with on an easement to contribute to our stewardship endowment because we are committing to perpetually stewarding the land. Not all landowners are able to participate. Not all landowners are willing to participate, and it must be voluntary. It can't be contractually required. And it is a charitable contribution to a nonprofit, so they can seek tax benefits, federal income tax benefits for that.
Hey Jess, real quick, when we see the numbers of what the landowners are contributing to the projects, because you're giving us, we're seeing the financial data, is the
Right.
stewardship contribution included in that information that you share with us, or does that come after the fact?
It is included. However, it won't be, a lot of times you'll see the land value donation match, and that's the percentage of the easement value that they aren't being paid. So that's kind of, it's considered a cash match, even though there's no cash being exchanged there. But the stewardship contribution, if they've committed one, it will be in a separate location. It will show up in the data that we provide, but it won't be lumped into that land value. It would be shown in a separate stewardship contribution category. Typically in easement donations, we're less encouraging of landowners to participate in that because they're already contributing the full value of their easement. And for our easement landowners that are being paid for their easement value, the way we typically structure that contribution is to put it in the settlement statement at closing. So they never actually have to come up with the cash. It's just less the cash received at closing. And so I think it also feels less bad. They never sign a check, it's just, it comes out of the escrow account. So I think it feels better for landowners. It ensures that we're getting paid because we have in the past, unfortunately, had landowners commit to a value and then not actually pay in the end, which doesn't feel great. But that it will be shown, but shown as a separate contribution line, not lumped in. And we've done a few, I think recently we've done a couple donated easements that I've presented, so they might not have had a stewardship contribution. All right, preparing closing documents sounds nice and tidy. But when that involves agency review, it's such a mess because there's so much there. I think I've got an agency funded project closing on Monday in Haywood County, so you all haven't seen it. And it has had 6 different settlement statement versions, and that's just the settlement statement. So there can be just a lot of back and forth with the agency, and they might request one change and then not have seen another part that they wanted changed. It just gets very messy in the back and forth. So it actually takes a lot of time, like possibly months, to prepare the closing documents to the satisfaction of our funding agency partners. And that funder review, luckily this is changing and evolving, which is helpful, except that it's changing and evolving, so it's hard to anticipate. But it used to be, and Ariel has lived this challenge with me. It used to be that our agency partners wouldn't look at any of the due diligence until we had all of the due diligence completed. But the survey, for example, is foundational to everything else. The phase 1 ESA is relying on that survey data. It's quoting the surveyed acreage. The appraisal is relying on the survey. The title investigation is relying on the survey. And so when there's a change to the survey, there's a cascade effect that has to be carried through all of the other due diligence. And it used to be that they wouldn't review any of it until it was all complete. And so there was a lot of revision having to happen. They're becoming a little more fluid and more efficient, both our state and federal partners, in reviewing some of those things as they come in, or at least before we seek further due diligence, so that we can make sure that foundation is solid before it informs all the rest of the work. But funder review is a challenge. And I will say the state is getting much smoother. The federal program, it depends a lot on who your reviewer is, how quickly the review goes, and how smoothly it goes. It's especially challenging when you have both the state and federal programs involved because it sets off this ricochet pattern of review where one agency will review and request changes that then the other agency has to review and approve and maybe request changes that then the other agency, you get the idea. It bounces back and forth. So we at SHC try really hard not to pair those two programs if we can avoid it funding wise. But on the Warren Wilson project, for example, that budget was so aspirational. As a nonprofit, they get no benefit from the donated portion of their easement. So we tried our best to get to the highest value we could for them. And it required using every potential funding source to get there. Any questions on due diligence? I will just I guess continue to wrap up these thoughts with on the due diligence. It might sound simple, you know, if you're buying a house, for example, you might do a lot of these things, and they might go really quickly, right? You might have 60 days for your due diligence period. We typically ask for 2 to 3 years for a due diligence period on a conservation easement because it might take that long. Hopefully it doesn't. But these things are done to such a rigorous level because of all of the review and all of, you know, there are taxpayer dollars going into these transactions, and our agency partners are very, very careful and very, very risk averse in what they will accept. So it's a very rigorous process that takes a lot of time, but it's building a foundation for a perpetual easement. So it really does need to be a real tight ship because we're trying to prepare for the worst bad actor coming in the future that might try to break the conservation easement. And that's why our surveys cost $40,000 to $90,000. It's expensive work because it's very elaborately detailed work, but it's done very well. I'm going to see if I have any other slides. I might be wrapping up here. Yes, that's the end. Happy to entertain any questions we might have. And I'm going to pause real quick to plug in my computer because I don't think it's plugged into the wall.
Jess,
Yes, I'm listening.
are the conservation easements a public record? And if so, how do we find those?
If you go to the Register of Deeds online and look for in our region, you would be looking for Buncombe County Soil and Water Conservation District or Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy as the grantee on the grantee line of the deed.
Okay, and there's a little bit of Conserving Carolina, I think, in our county.
Yep, any of our sorry, I've got a sun glare. Any of the conservation partners that hold easements, if you look for that agency, that organization as the grantee, you should find all the things we own in fee simple and all the easements.
Okay, great. Second question. Do you all work with, I think, the national organization called the Trust for Public Lands at all?
We do partner with them in various projects.
Okay, and are they basically a funder then?
Funder, sometimes thought partner. Ariel, was it TPL that was involved with the bond, developing the bond?
Yes, yeah. So the commissioners in the county partnered with the Trust for Public Land to do the initial polling on the 2022 open space bond to see how favorable it would be on the ballot. And so that's the main interaction that we've had with them. It was very helpful. They did all the polling for us, let us know the results, helped the county kind of figure out how to present the bond, how to use or what language to use and all of that. So that's the main piece. And I think my understanding is that's the plan again. should they proceed with another bond.
Okay, thank you. I have one or two others, but let me give other people a chance first.
Hey, Jess, would you stop sharing your screen so we can
yeah.
see everyone's face? Thank you so much.
If nobody else has a question, is there a specific type of easement for these linear trails like I know the overland trail goes through public and private property and, SHAC is working on this conservation corridor from Mount Pisgah up through Sandy Mush and ideally over to Max Patch. That's probably a 50-year project. But one could conceive of part of that is a trail that would connect the mountains to sea trails to the Appalachian Trail if we're, dreaming 50 years out. That would clearly have to go through some private properties. Is there a type of conservation easement specifically for linear trails that would this used?
Not a conservation easement, but trail easements. There's such a thing as trail easements. That priority zone that you're talking about, each of those, any transaction that happens there is all in negotiation with the landowner. And so that would take a landowner willing to not only do conservation, but also permit public access. If it's land that we own in fee, we always have that right. We can allow that access, and we could commit a trail easement through our land, although it is very challenging for us to encumber land that we own by our accreditation standards, but for that type of purpose, we probably could. Depending on the way an easement is designed, they often limit the ability to have subsequent easements through them. Especially NCDA, for example, we've looked into this at Warren Wilson and has very specifically said they will not allow public access easements through any easement land that they've paid for. So they will not allow any overlap like that, and that would have to be excluded. So it's tough to design for a potential trail if you've got a project that's one easement, not adjacent to other land yet, and talk with a landowner about allowing a trail access easement. So it depends very much on the individual landowner and the tenor of the relationship with them.
Okay, so clearly the landowner has to agree, but I think you also said that if there are existing, say, conservation easements that didn't include trail access, it could potentially, even if the landowner said, oh, it's okay now, the landowner might have already signed a conservation easement with Conservancy, and that Conservancy either legally could not or would not allow that. So you've got two gates to get through.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Looks like we have another question.
Yeah, I have a clarification, or I don't know if it looks like Hannah's here from Riverlink, and I don't know if she can speak to this, but Riverlink was saying, because we have been wrestling with this idea of the greenway going through Warren Wilson while at the same time having our easements through SHC. There are some other ways. I just wanted to say,
Right.
Stag, there are some other ways, and Riverlink has precedent of that, of like different legal, we're most focused on easements here, but to kind of allow for or document that it is the landowner's intention to maintain public access, So anyway, thinking outside the box. Hannah, I don't know. Renee was talking about it the other day. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Not super specifically, but a lot of our easements do allow for like greenways to come through them, or can allow public access too. So
Yeah, I think the big thing is that the greenways, like if you're trying to get, for example, Stag, you're talking about connecting to the mountains to sea and the AT, like sometimes like the greenways commission or one of those needs assurances that it won't get cut off, and so sometimes you can get proof of the easement that will appease the folks that are worried about the trail getting cut off.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jess? All right, Jess, thank you so much for that. That was incredible and just a great little reminder of all the great stuff that SEHC are doing, but also just the complexity of what goes into a conservation easement. We are very appreciative of all that all people in this field are doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ling, and thanks everyone for your attention. If y'all have any questions later, feel free to reach out. Y'all have my contact info.
Lang, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Next on our agenda is an update from our land conservation agencies. I know we have Hannah and Jess here. Who has an update for us?
I'm happy to share. I don't have a ton of new things from my last update with y'all, but kind of just working on some of the same things. But for our Gateway Park project, just to reorient us, this is a parcel Riverlink owns, about 1.5 acres on the corner of Pearson Bridge and Riverside Drive, just north of the RAD. And so we've been waiting to build a passive park here that would complement the incoming multi-use path that is a part of the Riverside Drive widening project. So we've been waiting on plans from NCDOT to be finalized. And just this morning, we received the construction documents from DOT, so we're able to move forward with our technical design for the park. So full steam ahead on that. Otherwise, we submitted a NC Land and Water Fund grant application for the Beacon Park Stream Restoration Project in Swannanoa. So we'll know in the fall if we get that funding, and if so, then that will require a conservation easement on the stream restoration, which would be about 1 acre. And then otherwise I don't know if I mentioned this last month, I might have, but we own a property in East Asheville right on the Swannanoa River that was heavily impacted by Hurricane Helene. Majority of the mature trees were washed off site, but we were left with like this beach access to the river. And we're moving forward very quickly. We have a good amount of funding secured to create a passive park there, kind of improving parking and the access to the beach area. So we're excited to move forward with that as well. Yeah, and then since Jess mentioned it in her presentation, we're also working on our Land Trust Alliance accreditation renewal this year as well. So busy with that. Yeah, that's about it.
Hannah?
Thank you. Go ahead, Stag.
Yeah, there's been in the Asheville Watchdog recently, can we eliminate the dam that's opposite the, and there's a meeting, I think, of the MSD today at 2 that I was hoping to attend, but cannot. I assume you all are actively involved in that, and could you just give us a quick status on what may happen there and what needs to be done?
Yeah, so it's mostly our executive director, Elisa, who's involved in that. She's been working really closely with American Rivers and some other folks there to just try and, well, one, I know the last update was trying to encourage MSD to have transparent communications around it. Yeah, honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen in this meeting today. It could be completely shut down by MSD. Or not. I'm not as in the details on that project, but it sounds like it could go either way. So we'll definitely know more after this meeting.
Yeah, for others on the call, you might want to get a hold of your county commissioners. The Asheville Watchdog article seemed to say that, MSD wanted to basically give the finger to the public, but they are utility, and in some ways, I think under the governance of the county commissioners, but I don't understand that enough.
So there was a plan that was done to study the dam, and MSD, it was commissioned by American Rivers, is that right? I think so. And so they included MSD in that, and MSD from the very beginning was pretty skeptical, but they allowed the study to happen. And as the study progressed, MSD staff became more and more negative about removal of the dam, and they didn't want it to go to their board. So there's a board that is over all the staff, and so that happened. And so it's contentious issue between MSD and American Rivers. And the reason I know this is because we did for that study, we did the environmental benefits of the dam removal. And so as a conservation group, I would think that you guys would all see the benefits of dam removal. So to Stag's point, I would highly recommend we take some action and talk to folks if you can attend, do whatever you're comfortable doing, because there's a lot of benefits to that removal, and there's a good study in there that has a lot of information that is pretty balanced, because MSD was part of that process. But like I said, the staff is very opposed to it at the leadership level. So that's what I know. Just thought I'd share since it came up.
David, how is the board of MSD established, and who are they responsible for as opposed to staff? In other words, is this the type thing that the board could tell the staff, I'm sorry, you work for the board, and
right? Yeah. That's why, correct. The board can push for a decision on that the staff might not agree with. That is a potential outcome, because the board, like, there's the mayor of the city of Asheville. There's Buncombe County has representation on there too. There's different leadership within our community that sit on this board. So that's another opportunity to talk to some of those folks.
I'll add real quick. I'm here today in my personal capacity, but in my professional life, I work on this. So if anybody has any questions and wants to follow up with me offline, feel free to do that.
Patrick, who do you work with again?
I work at the Southern Environmental Law Center.
Oh, great. Right. Yes. So you guys would be big proponents of dam removal as well.
Okay. Jess, did you have anything that you would like to update us about?
I guess the biggest thing is the Deaverview closing tomorrow. It's really exciting. We had a celebration with staff and county staff and our attorney staff on last Friday, and it was really lovely, and I'm very excited for the public to get to experience that place.
Woo-hoo.
Jess, what's the status of the Upper Soundly Drive that was approved by the LCAB?
I do not know, Stag. That's not my project. It's in play, but I don't know. It's not. All I can see on our system is what upcoming closings there are, and it's not upcoming as a closing. Okay.
Lang, maybe we could have an update on that at the next meeting.
Would you like to put that in a form that Ariel and staff?
We can just have Michelle give us a brief update. Maybe she can attend the next meeting. I think, because that's Hall Creek, right?
Yeah, it's also called Hawk Creek. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully, all land trust representatives will attend the next meeting, because we're talking about the new grant process. So I'm sure we'll get Michelle here, and you can ask her at that point. But I can go ahead and just give a very brief, I know we're running over time, but a brief Ag and Land Resources update. So last night, Martha and I went to the commissioners meeting. We presented on 2 Ag Advisory Board donation easements. and a farm out in Fairview. So that's super exciting. Commissioners approved transaction costs on those. And then Tom Fonslow also joined us and presented on the Duck Branch and the 2 Light Center tracks, the nature preserve and the farm. And all of those were funded by the commissioners with bond funds last night. So all of that has been funded, and exciting. 5 new projects were approved last night. So very exciting. Yeah, Lisa?
I guess I was thinking about this, and this is a newbie question, but to Stag's point as well, I wonder, you probably have it. Is there a with reasonably the right amount of detail, a way we could just have a spreadsheet or something of different projects and where they are? They could be very coarse grained, so we don't get into details, but we'd say, okay, has cleared this, and here's a step that we could agree on, so that then at any given time we'd know, and we, you know, it wouldn't need to require you all to necessarily, like, us ask about specific tracks at any given time. I don't know if that'd be helpful.
I think that's a great idea. We've been talking about our own internal tracking and ways that we could send kind of, I mean, this is maybe too much in the weeds, but ways we can send automatic like requests for an update to the land trust point person on that project, and then they would just easily be able to update it every quarter or every 6 months or something like that, and then you guys would be able to know that it was up to date, and then have the view, probably the view only version of that. So we'll follow up and kind of start thinking about how to put that together, and then implement it with the land trust, hopefully in a very easy way for them too. But I like that idea. That way, if someone's not here, you guys could kind of know where that project is at the moment.
I want to push for quarterly to 6 months. I like that. I think that would be a lot of reporting to try to achieve for monthly meetings.
Yeah, no, that's not realistic at all. No grant does that. Okay, and then a couple more tiny, or just one tiny, not tiny, very exciting thing. Martha, we have a closing today at 11 with Splendor Valley Farm out in Sandy Mush. So that is a 22-acre parcel that's right in the center of Sandy Mush. It's kind of like a puzzle piece, and it's been a long project in the making, state and federal funds, and it's closing today. So woohoo, that's happening. Very exciting. 100% prime soils, really fantastic ag piece. And so, yeah, that's all we have. Thank you so much, Jess, for your presentation. I think that's super helpful. I'm excited about having some of these educational presentations to get some of our, just answer questions and get new board members up to speed. So thank you for doing that. Yep, David?
Real quick, because I think we're getting into the announcements and getting ready to adjourn. We are working towards a Jupiter Farmland Conservation Community Meeting, either November 10th or 12th. And I've already confirmed with Terry Wells, Michelle with SAHAC, Ariel and Martha that those dates work. We're just kind of, I still need to get up with the fire department to see if the 10th or the 12th will work for them. So just want to let you know that's kind of moving forward. We decided not to try to rush it and do it before the season, the farmland season, farmer season really picked up. So just wanted to give everyone an update on that.
Fantastic.
Thank you, David. Any other announcements from anyone? All right. Well, thank you very much, Ariel and Martha and Rika, for making all this happen, for y'all being here. As we are at the end of our agenda, I will adjourn this meeting.
So hold on first. Will you vote to adjourn?
Okay.
Somebody make a motion, somebody second, and then
And move to adjourn.
Second.
Great.
All
Bye.
Thank you, Jess.